I grew up in a pretty tough neighborhood. It wasn't exactly the best place to raise a kid with social anxiety, but I made do. Even though I missed a grade in elementary school, I managed to catch up, especially when it came to relationships. My area was lower middle class, filled with people who were just trying to get by, but I was always surrounded by beautiful women my age. College was a bit different for me. I didn't have the typical experience because I lived at home. You see, one of the top 5 engineering schools in the world was just a 10-minute drive from my parents' house, so I stayed local to save money. Even though I wasn't particularly social, I ended up helping a lot of the women in my area with their studies. I tutored them in math, business, and other subjects they struggled with in high school and community college. In exchange, they gave me advice on relationships and intimacy, which worked out well for everyone involved. Between the ages of 18 and 21, I had brief but significant connections with about 11 women. These weren't romantic relationships. They were more like partnerships where both sides benefited. I was known for being patient, intelligent, and reserved, which made it easy to bond with these women on an intellectual level. But there was one woman who stood out during that time, Jezebel. That wasn't her real name, but she went by that on the streets. Jezebel was tall and athletic, strong but not overweight. Her face wasn't remarkable, but her body was stunning. She was confident, seductive, and fully embraced her physicality, often playing sports like softball and basketball. She wasn't the most educated, but she had big dreams, and one of them was to start an adult website. She was different from the other women I spent time with. Jezebel never asked me for tutoring before we were intimate. She simply enjoyed being with me. Over the course of a few years, we met several times, and I can still remember each of those encounters vividly. She was wild, confident, and always made sure I knew she enjoyed herself, though sometimes I wondered if she was just pretending. Nonetheless, she told me I was the only man she trusted enough to be with intimately without protection because she knew I was safe. During my senior year of college, I was deep into my studies, developing a high-tech security system similar to the EasyPass system on toll roads, but for encrypted, secure access. My work eventually caught the attention of government agencies, military branches, and corporations. By the time I was 24, I had patented several inventions, generating a decent amount of wealth. I wasn't great at managing people, though, so I hired lawyers to set up shell companies and offshore accounts to protect my assets. Publicly, I appeared as the head of product development for one of my companies, but behind the scenes, I controlled everything. Despite my success, I still struggled with social anxiety, which made it difficult for me to find meaningful relationships. Finally, when I was 26, I met Allison. She was stunning, easily the most beautiful woman who had ever shown any interest in me. Her beauty captivated me, but as time went on, I realized our connection was pretty superficial. She never asked about my work, never showed any real interest in what I did, which was odd but also convenient when it came to the prenuptial agreement. My lawyer, Gail, insisted on one before we got married, and although I hesitated, Gail made it clear that she wouldn't continue working with me if I didn't get Allison to sign it. Allison didn't mind. She even had her father review the document, and she signed without batting an eye. The agreement ensured that my patents, companies, and any future earnings would remain mine. It was a safeguard, and it worked out perfectly. Our intimate relationship was satisfying, and 2.5 years into the marriage, we were expecting our first child. Then one day, during a casual visit to my parents' house, I ran into Jezebel on the street. We hadn't seen each other in years, but she still looked amazing. We grabbed coffee and caught up. She told me she was still working on launching her adult website but was running into some financial issues. She needed $25,000 to get it off the ground. After some thought, I decided to help her out. The money wasn't a big deal to me, and I liked Jezebel. We met a week later at the same coffee shop. This time, she was dressed provocatively, showing off her figure like she used to. After some small talk, I handed her an envelope with $25,000 in cash. Jezebel was moved to tears, something I never thought I'd see from her. She even offered me ownership of the site in exchange for the money, but I refused. The money was a gift, no strings attached. She then made me another offer, a more intimate one, but I turned her down, telling her I loved my wife. After helping Jezebel out with the money, I didn't think much of it. Life moved on, and Allison and I continued to build our family. We had 2 more kids after our first, a daughter named Whitney, and then a son, Jerry. Although I didn't name Whitney after Jezebel, I couldn't help but notice the coincidence. Life seemed perfect on the outside. I had a beautiful wife, 3 amazing kids, and a successful career. But there was always this nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. The more time passed, the more I started noticing things about Allison that bothered me. For one, she was incredibly strict with our eldest daughter, Amber, who was 12 at the time. Amber was brilliant, inheriting my intelligence and Allison's looks, but Allison treated her more harshly than the other kids. Their relationship became strained, and it got to the point where Amber wouldn't go anywhere with her mother unless I was there too. This became a serious problem when Allison wanted to take the kids to a lake house for a week during the summer, and I had to work. It took everything I had to convince Amber to go, and I had to sit down with Allison to make sure she would be kind to Amber during the trip. Despite the tension with Amber, Allison had a great relationship with our younger kids, Whitney and Jerry. She stayed home with the children, but she always found time for her various social activities. As a result, I often spent as much time with the kids as she did, if not more. I tried to be involved in everything, from their schoolwork to their extracurricular activities. I even learned about baseball and basketball just so I could talk to Jerry about his favorite sports. For the most part, our life was good. We had been married for about 15 years, and things were stable. But then, everything changed in an instant. I had just returned from a short business trip. It was only a one-night stay in another city, so I was eager to get back home. I had even called Allison the night before to let her know my exact schedule, but she seemed uninterested. I brushed it off, thinking she was just busy with the kids or tired from the day. But as I turned onto our street, something caught my eye. A red Corvette. That car was unmistakable, and I immediately recognized it. It belonged to Roger Mayberry, one of the top salespeople at my company. He was charming, good at his job, and well-liked by everyone, but I couldn't figure out why he was driving down my street in the middle of the day. Maybe he had business nearby, I thought. But a part of me knew that was too convenient. When I pulled into the driveway, I shook the thought from my mind. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, but something gnawed at me. I walked into the house, calling out for Allison. No answer. I headed upstairs to our bedroom, and that's when everything went black. The next thing I remember, I was waking up in a hospital bed. My head felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, and a nurse was standing beside me, checking my vitals. "You're awake," she said with a kind smile. "How are you feeling?" "Like my head's about to split open," I groaned. I was disoriented, confused, and the pain in my skull was unbearable. What happened? How did I end up here? The nurse explained that, according to my wife, I had tripped and fallen in our hallway, hitting my head on the marble floor. She said I was lucky to be alive because the impact had caused a serious concussion. As she spoke, the memory of what led to my fall slowly crept back into my mind. It wasn't just an accident. I had walked in on something that shattered my world in an instant. The memory of seeing Allison with Roger flashed through my mind, and my stomach turned. The nurse noticed the change in my demeanor and quickly grabbed a container just in time for me to vomit into it. It wasn't much, mostly bile since I hadn't eaten anything since the morning. My head was spinning, both from the physical injury and the emotional blow I had just experienced. I had never imagined this. Allison, the woman I had loved and trusted for 15 years, was cheating on me with Roger Mayberry. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. Why? How long had it been going on? All these questions swirled in my mind as I lay there, feeling completely and utterly devastated. The doctor came in to check on me, and after a brief examination, she confirmed that while my concussion was serious, I was expected to make a full recovery. But that wasn't what weighed on me. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional wreckage I was left with. I couldn't stop thinking about Allison, about how she had betrayed me. After the doctor left, the nurse, Nancy, tried to comfort me. "Your wife had to leave to pick up your kids," she said. "But she'll be back later today." I checked the clock. It was 3:30 in the afternoon, just about the time the kids would be getting out of school. "She's probably picking them up now," I muttered, feeling a wave of nausea hit me again. Nancy asked if I wanted something to eat, but the thought of food made me sick. "No, thanks. I'm not sure I could keep anything down right now." As I lay there in the hospital bed, my mind raced with what I had seen, what it meant for my life, and how everything was about to change. Later that afternoon, my kids came rushing into the hospital room, their faces full of concern and excitement. They were talking all at once, trying to hug me but being careful not to touch my head. Despite everything, I couldn't help but smile at their energy. For a brief moment, I felt normal again, as if nothing had changed. But when I glanced over their heads, I saw Allison standing at the door. She looked different. Nervous, maybe even guilty, though she tried to mask it with concern. I avoided eye contact with her, focusing instead on my kids, asking about their day and telling them I was fine. I didn't want them to see the hurt or confusion I was feeling. After about 15 minutes of conversation, the nurse came in and gently suggested it was time for me to rest. Allison agreed, ushering the kids out of the room, though I noticed she stayed behind for a few minutes after they left. As soon as we were alone, Allison came up to the bed. "Brian," she began, her voice shaky, "I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to find out like this. I never wanted to hurt you." I closed my eyes, not ready to hear her excuses or her version of the truth. I had already seen enough. She went on, her voice soft and filled with regret. "I hope we can talk about it when you're feeling better, but if you don't want to, I understand." She paused, waiting for a response, but I had none to give. Finally, she added, "I'll be back tomorrow to check on you, but if you want to talk before then, just call me." The words hung in the air as she left the room. I didn't watch her go, but I knew this conversation wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Once Allison was gone, I felt a strange sense of relief. The worst part, the shock of discovery, had already passed. Now, it was time to figure out what I was going to do next. The next morning, the doctor checked me over and told me I could go home, but I'd need to take it easy for the next few days. No heavy lifting, no strenuous activity. I promised I'd follow her orders, even though I knew that emotionally, I had a mountain to climb. I was discharged, and my assistant, Jack, came to pick me up. Jack wasn't just my right-hand man at work. He was also a loyal friend who had been with me through thick and thin. When he arrived, I couldn't help but feel grateful for his presence. As soon as I got home, everything felt different. I couldn't look at my house, my bed, or even my kitchen without feeling the sting of betrayal. But I had to focus. I had to come up with a plan. Getting back at Roger Mayberry wasn't going to be enough. I needed to make sure Allison felt the consequences of her actions, but more importantly, I had to protect my kids. I wasn't the kind of person to act rashly, though. I knew I had to think this through, plan every step carefully. I started by gathering information. Roger was well known in my company, and while he was good at his job, he was in a vulnerable position. His security clearance was one of the highest in the company because of the sensitive nature of our work. Losing that clearance would ruin his career, and I knew just how to make that happen. I called my lawyer, Gail, and explained the situation. She wasn't just my lawyer. She had been a close advisor for years and had helped me navigate several tricky business deals. Gail was sharp, no nonsense, and always had my back. After hearing what had happened, she recommended a divorce attorney who specialized in cases like mine. We laid out a plan. I would gather as much evidence as possible and make sure Roger's involvement in this affair would be his downfall. But more importantly, I needed to ensure I got sole custody of the kids. That was non-negotiable. Over the next few days, I avoided Allison as much as possible. We slept in separate rooms, and I kept conversations with her brief and to the point. It wasn't hard to do. She seemed to know that she had crossed a line and wasn't pushing for any deep discussions. I ordered some high-tech surveillance cameras, the kind that could be easily hidden and controlled remotely, and installed them in the master bedroom. If there was more to catch, I was going to catch it. The kids, of course, were blissfully unaware of what was going on. I made sure to spend as much time with them as I could, taking them out for milkshakes and sitting down with them to talk about school and their favorite activities. One afternoon, while we were enjoying our milkshakes, I decided to break the news gently. "Listen," I said, keeping my tone calm but serious, "there's going to be some changes around here. Your mom and I are going through a rough patch, and I don't know how things are going to turn out. But I want you to know that none of this is your fault. No matter what happens, your mom and I both love you more than anything." Amber, always perceptive, immediately picked up on what I was implying. "If you and Mom get divorced, I want to live with you," she said firmly. Whitney looked shocked. "Are you getting a divorce?" she asked, her voice full of worry. "I don't know yet," I replied honestly. "But no matter what happens, we're going to be okay." Amber, who had always had a strained relationship with her mother, was quick to offer her opinion. "I don't want to live with her. She doesn't care about us like you do." I gently placed my hand on her arm. "Amber, I believe your mom loves you. She just has a hard time showing it sometimes. Let's not judge her too harshly, okay?" The conversation ended on a somber note, but I could tell the kids understood that things were changing. Whitney seemed especially worried, but I reassured her as best I could. Jerry, being the youngest, seemed to take it all in stride, asking if I would still come to his Little League game the next day. I promised him I wouldn't miss it for the world. When we got home that evening, I made sure at least one of the kids was always between me and Allison during any interactions. I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. There was still too much I needed to sort out in my head. The days passed quietly, though tension simmered beneath the surface. I avoided Allison as much as I could, which wasn't difficult. We barely spoke except for the necessary conversations about the kids or the house. I stayed in the guest room, far away from the bedroom where she had betrayed me. I needed space, both physically and emotionally, to figure out my next move. Over the weekend, I started putting my plan into action. First, I gathered all the financial records I could find, bank statements, credit card bills, anything that might show a pattern of behavior. I found Roger's bank account number from an old business document and compared it with some of Allison's transactions. As I expected, there were small, subtle payments that had been transferred between them. I had the proof I needed, but it wasn't enough. I had to go further. With the surveillance cameras now in place, I could monitor what was happening in the house while I was away. If Roger came over again, I would catch it on camera. Jack, ever the loyal assistant, helped me set up everything. He was more than just my colleague. He was someone I trusted completely, someone who would never let me down. Together, we installed the cameras in such a way that they would go undetected. If Allison and Roger tried anything, I would know. As the days passed, I kept a close eye on Allison's behavior. She was trying too hard to act normal, as if nothing had happened. But I could see through it. The guilt was there, just beneath the surface. It was only a matter of time before she slipped up. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Allison asked if I wanted to talk. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, her eyes filled with an odd mix of sadness and hope. "We can't keep avoiding this," she said quietly. "I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. But we need to talk about what happens next." I looked at her, my expression unreadable. "I'm still trying to process everything," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I need more time before we have that conversation." She nodded, though I could tell she was disappointed. "I understand," she whispered. "I just hope that, when you're ready, we can find a way forward." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say at that moment. I wasn't ready to forgive her, and I wasn't even sure if I wanted to. But I had to play it cool for now, keep things under control until I could finalize my plan. On Monday morning, I went back to work. Before leaving, I made sure the cameras were activated, and I spent a good part of my day at the office monitoring the feeds from my laptop. I didn't want to miss anything. My job was demanding, but my mind was elsewhere, constantly drifting back to what was happening at home. A few days later, my suspicions were confirmed. I had barely finished watching the footage from the day before when I saw it, Allison and Roger, together again, in my house. They were intimate, and it wasn't just physical. There was a familiarity between them that stung more than I'd anticipated. This wasn't a casual fling. It had been going on for some time, and I realized, with a cold certainty, that they had been making a fool of me for who knows how long. I had the evidence I needed now. With the footage securely saved, I reached out to Gail again. We were moving forward with the divorce, and I wanted to make sure I would get sole custody of the kids. No way was I going to let Allison raise them after everything she had done. She didn't deserve them. The hardest part was keeping my cool around the kids. They had no idea what was going on, and I didn't want to burden them with it yet. They were already feeling the strain between their mother and me, and I didn't want to add to it. But Amber, being the observant one, sensed something. One night, she came into my room after her siblings were asleep. "Dad, I know something's wrong," she said quietly, sitting down on the edge of the bed. You and Mom. It's different. You're different. I sighed, sitting up to face her. Yeah, sweetheart, things are different. But it's nothing you need to worry about, okay? She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't satisfied with my answer. Is it because of me? Because of the way I act around Mom? My heart broke a little hearing that. No, Amber, this has nothing to do with you, I assured her. Your mom and I are just going through some things, but I promise you, it's not your fault. Amber looked down, her hands fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. I don't want to live with her if you two get divorced, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her. We'll figure everything out, okay? No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. She hugged me tightly, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else. My kids were the most important thing in the world to me, and I had to protect them. No matter what. The next few weeks went by in a blur. I continued collecting evidence, quietly building my case, and playing the role of a loving husband and father in front of Allison. It was exhausting, but necessary. The surveillance footage was my trump card, but I wasn't ready to play it just yet. I wanted to wait until the right moment, make sure everything was perfectly in place. Finally, after weeks of preparation, I was ready to take the next step. I had Gail arrange a meeting with Allison's lawyer. It was time to lay out the terms of the divorce, and I wasn't backing down from my demand for sole custody of the kids. When the day of the divorce meeting finally came, I felt a strange sense of calm. It was as if all the anger, the pain, and the betrayal had been building up to this moment, and now I was ready to face it head-on. I knew what I had to do. Gail and I walked into the conference room where Allison and her lawyer were waiting. Allison looked nervous, fidgeting with her hands, her eyes avoiding mine. I couldn't help but wonder if she had any idea what was about to happen. The meeting began as most do, with formalities, the lawyers talking legal jargon that felt distant and cold. But when it came time to discuss custody, that's when the real tension set in. Allison's lawyer suggested shared custody, something that would allow both of us to remain a part of the kids' lives. I immediately shut that down. I'm asking for sole custody, I said, my voice steady but firm. The kids need stability, and I'm the one who can provide that. Allison's lawyer glanced at her, clearly caught off guard by my directness. Allison finally looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. Brian, I don't want to lose the kids, she said softly. I love them. You should have thought about that before you cheated on me, I replied, my tone cold and unforgiving. You've put them at risk, you've put our family at risk, and I'm not going to let you continue to do that. Her face paled, and she knew what was coming next. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the footage. This is what I'm talking about, I said, sliding a USB drive across the table. Footage of you and Roger. In our house. In our bed. Allison's lawyer immediately tried to protest, but Gail cut him off. We have video evidence, and we're prepared to use it in court. This isn't just about infidelity, it's about the environment these kids are being raised in. Allison's face turned red as she stared at the USB drive, her hands trembling. Brian, please, she whispered. Don't do this. But it was already done. There was no going back now. I wasn't doing this to be spiteful, I was doing it to protect my kids. They deserved better than a mother who would lie and cheat, and they certainly deserved better than to be exposed to someone like Roger. After a long pause, Allison's lawyer leaned in and whispered something to her. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. What do you want? She finally asked, her voice breaking. I want full custody of the kids, I said firmly. You'll have visitation rights, but they'll live with me. I'll make sure they're taken care of, and you can see them on weekends, but that's it. And I want you to leave the house. The room fell silent as Allison absorbed what I was asking for. It was harsh, I knew that, but it was necessary. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and there were consequences for that. After a moment, she nodded, defeated. Fine, she whispered, wiping at her tears. I'll agree to it. With that, the rest of the meeting was just paperwork and formalities. We signed the agreements, and the lawyers hashed out the details. Allison would move out of the house within 2 weeks, and I would keep full custody of the kids. She was allowed weekend visits, but they would live with me full-time. It wasn't the ideal situation, but it was the best I could do given the circumstances. The drive home was quiet. I didn't feel triumphant, nor did I feel relieved. I felt empty. This wasn't how I had imagined my life would turn out. I had loved Allison once, deeply, and now it was all over. The woman I had built a life with had become someone I didn't even recognize anymore. When I got home, I sat the kids down and explained what was happening. I tried to keep my tone calm and reassuring, but it was hard. Amber took the news better than I expected, nodding as if she had already seen this coming. Whitney was quiet, her face showing a mixture of confusion and sadness, while Jerry, still too young to fully understand, just asked if I'd still be taking him to his Little League games. "I'll always be there for you, buddy," I told him, ruffling his hair. "Nothing's going to change that." That night, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat alone in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. My mind was spinning with thoughts of what had just happened. The divorce, the betrayal, the way my life had crumbled in a matter of months. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: I had to be strong for my kids. In the weeks that followed, Allison moved out of the house, and I worked on getting back to some sense of normalcy. The kids adjusted surprisingly well, though I could tell Amber still harbored a lot of anger toward her mother. I didn't try to change her mind. I knew she needed time to process everything, just like I did. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I received a message from Jezebel. We hadn't spoken much since I gave her the money to launch her website, but she was still on my mind from time to time. She asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee, and despite everything going on, I agreed. Maybe I needed the distraction, or maybe I just needed to see a familiar face. When I walked into the coffee shop, Jezebel was already sitting at a table, looking as stunning as ever. She smiled when she saw me and waved me over. "Hey, stranger," she said with a grin. "It's been a while." "Yeah, it has," I replied, sitting down across from her. We talked for hours, catching up on everything that had happened since we last saw each other. She told me her website had taken off and was doing better than she ever expected. I congratulated her, genuinely happy to hear that things were going well for her. As we talked, I realized how easy it was to be around her. There were no pretenses, no pressure. Just two people who understood each other in a way that was rare. By the end of the night, I found myself thinking that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more between us. But I wasn't ready for that yet. I still had too much to figure out, too much healing to do. When we finally said goodbye, Jezebel gave me a hug, her embrace warm and comforting. "Take care of yourself, Brian," she said softly. "And if you ever need someone to talk to, you know where to find me." I nodded, grateful for her kindness. "Thanks, Jezebel. I'll see you around." As I walked back to my car, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe things were going to be okay after all. The weeks turned into months, and life slowly began to settle into a new normal. The kids adjusted well to the changes, though there were still tough moments, especially for Amber, who struggled with her anger toward Allison. But overall, they were resilient. I did my best to keep things steady for them, to make sure they knew they were loved and that their world wasn't falling apart, even if mine had. Allison moved into a new place not far from the kids' school, and while our interactions were civil, they were distant. We kept things about the kids and nothing more. There were no more long, awkward conversations or forced apologies. She accepted the terms of the divorce, and as far as I could tell, she was trying to move on with her life too. I stayed focused on my work and on being there for my kids, but despite everything, I couldn't shake the thoughts of Jezebel. Our meeting at the coffee shop had left me feeling something I hadn't expected: hope for the future. Jezebel had always been someone I respected and admired, not just for her beauty, but for her ambition and her drive. She had created a life for herself on her own terms, and I found that incredibly attractive. One night, a few months after the divorce was finalized, I decided to reach out to her. We'd kept in touch here and there, but I hadn't seen her since that night at the coffee shop. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I felt drawn to her in a way I hadn't felt about anyone in a long time. "Hey, Jezebel," I texted. "Want to grab dinner sometime? It'd be great to catch up." To my surprise, she responded almost immediately. "I'd love that. How about this weekend?" That Saturday, we met at a quiet little restaurant just outside the city. Jezebel looked stunning as always, dressed in a simple but elegant outfit that made her stand out without even trying. We spent the evening talking, laughing, and reminiscing about the old days. It was easy being around her, and by the end of the night, I realized that I didn't just want to be her friend anymore, I wanted something more. As we walked out of the restaurant, I turned to her, feeling a bit nervous but determined to be honest. Jezebel, I've been thinking a lot about us. I know we've always been friends, but I can't help but feel like there's something more here. She smiled, her eyes sparkling in the dim light. I've been thinking the same thing, Brian, she said softly. I didn't want to push, though. I know you've been through a lot. I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I have, I admitted. But I'm ready to move forward. And I think I want to see where this goes. Jezebel stepped closer, her hand gently resting on my arm. Then let's see, she whispered. From that night on, things changed between us. We started seeing each other more regularly, and before long, it became clear that we weren't just old friends reconnecting. We were building something new. Something real. Jezebel fit into my life in ways I hadn't expected. She was kind, supportive, and she adored my kids, which was the most important thing to me. Amber, Whitney, and Jerry took to her easily, and she quickly became a part of our family. I never imagined that I would find love again after everything that had happened with Allison, but Jezebel proved me wrong. She was everything I needed, strong, independent, and understanding. She didn't try to replace Allison in the kids' lives, but she became a constant, positive presence for them. 2 years after the divorce, I found myself in a place I hadn't thought possible. I was happy. Truly happy. The business was thriving, my relationship with my kids was stronger than ever, and Jezebel was by my side through it all. She had even sold her adult website and moved on to a new venture, designing and selling specialized clothing online. It was a small but successful business, and she loved every minute of it. Though we never talked about marriage, we were committed to each other in every way that mattered. Jezebel moved in with me and the kids, and we built a life together, one that was far different from what I had with Allison. But it was better. It was real. Allison still had her visitation rights, and to her credit, she was a good mother to the kids when she was with them. Over time, Amber's anger toward her softened, and the two of them slowly repaired their relationship. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than it had been. I was glad for that, for Amber's sake. Roger, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. After losing his job and his security clearance, he moved out of town, taking a low-level sales job on the West Coast. From what I heard, his life had unraveled after our confrontation, and he was never able to regain the success he once had. I didn't feel any pity for him, though. He had made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. Looking back, I realized that everything that had happened, every betrayal, every heartbreak, had led me to where I was now. It had been a painful journey, but I had come out stronger on the other side. I had my kids, I had Jezebel, and I had a life I was proud of. As I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset with Jezebel by my side and the kids playing in the yard, I felt a deep sense of peace. Life had thrown me a curveball, but I had hit it out of the park. For the first time in years, everything felt right. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.